This encounter happened to me a few years back. I'd never found myself in a situation like it before, and it's one I don't care to experience again. I'd finished up work late one night. I'd ended up staying back to get some of the tasks complete that I was behind on, as at the time I felt the pressure of getting them done. I didn't drive at the time, so the commute to work was either the bus or train. With finishing so late that night, and wanting the quickest way home, I didn't have the patience to wait for the next bus, knowing that at the time it was, they would be running few and far between. So checking the schedule, I saw that I was in luck, and there was one final train heading my route that I could catch. Pushing it for time, I didn't have long to get to the station. Luckily, my place of work wasn't overly far from the station, so what started out as a light jog turned into a full-on sprint, trying to beat time and make it to the platform before the train arrived. When I finally arrived at the station, I was relieved that I'd made it to the station before the last train had come in. Otherwise, it would have been an expensive ride home. Having purchased my ticket online, I take a seat on the platform waiting for the train. The platform was peaceful at this time of night, quiet and empty. I sat on my phone as I scrolled through Instagram, waiting for the train. I began to hear the sound of a train nearby as it made its way to the station. Looking up, I could see it was coming from the opposite direction, so it wasn't my train. The train slowed on its approach as it pulled into the station. As I looked over, it looked empty. Not many late-night commuters, which would probably be the same for my train. It soon kicked back into high gear again as it made its way out of the station and on with its journey. As the train exited the station, I got back to scrolling through my phone. It was then I had to take a second glance over to the other platform, as something caught my eye. The platform was no longer empty, but what sat across from me on the opposite platform was someone dressed as a clown. As I looked over, I noticed this person was staring right at me. I remember thinking, what the fuck? Where did they come from? Did they get off that train? As I didn't recall even seeing anyone on that train to get off. And I'm pretty sure I'd have noticed someone dressed as a clown. Or did they happen to enter the platform as the train was leaving the station? Either way, it was weird that this person was now sat directly opposite me, staring and smiling at me. I didn't know where to look. I stared back for a second before breaking eye contact and looking back to my phone, thinking that was weird. As I tried to occupy myself and wait for my train, but I couldn't help but look back up. As I looked back over, the clown was now standing as they walked towards the stairs, still staring at me, before turning and walking back inside and out of sight. Strange, I thought, as I began to think. Maybe they had indeed got off their train and had taken a seat before leaving. I don't know, but either way, seeing a clown at that time of night on an empty station platform was both unexpected and creepy. My train was due at that point anyway, so I'd be home soon enough. After sending a text, I checked the time on my phone and looked up to see if the train was in sight. But instead of my eyes being met with the sight of my train rolling into the station, my stomach filled with dread, as they were instead met with the sight of the clown. The clown was now sat on the bench over from me, on the same platform, on the same side I was sitting on. Sitting again, staring at me. Instead of leaving, they must have walked across the overpass and come to this platform. An uncomfortable feeling washed over me. I didn't know what to do, so I stared back at the clown as my pulse began to race, trying to act calm and unmoved, even though I was freaked out by this point. In as steady a voice as I could and with irritation, I said, "Can I help you with something?" The clown, unmoved, didn't respond. All the while they continued to stare at me as their smile grew, their eyes not even blinking. I didn't know what the hell was going on and what was up with this person, or if it was some kind of stupid prank they were playing. I said they weren't funny, and finally I could hear the sound of my train coming in the distance, its lights approaching the platform. I grabbed my bag and stood up, looking back at the clown, who was now staring at me with a stern, emotionless face. The train screeched into the station as the doors opened to empty carts. I stepped on. Looking back, I saw the clown still sitting there. I sat down watching them as they didn't move. I thought to myself, finally, I would be out of there and away from that freak. And just as I'd begun to think that, the doors began to close. But not before the clown darted up and jumped onto the adjoining cart, next to the cart I was in. Are you fucking kidding me? I thought as the train began to move from the station. I turned, sitting and facing forward. I only had a few stops to go. I couldn't relax as much as I tried, knowing they were in the other cart. I turned looking, but couldn't see any sign of them through the window. I sat back forward as we reached the first stop. Looking around, no one else got on the train, and looking to see if the clown got off, it looked as though they didn't. The train in motion again on course to its next stop. It was then a shiver crawled down my spine, as I heard the sound of laughter in my cart coming from behind me. As I slowly turned, I could now see the clown, sitting a few seats behind, staring at me as it pointed in my direction. What the hell was this person's problem? Becoming concerned and freaked out, I didn't want to pay them any attention. So I looked forward, grabbing my things tight, knowing my stop was next. As my train hurtled through a tunnel, the light from the cart dimmed, before returning to normal as we passed through. I was almost at my stop. But it was then I heard a shuffling from the seat behind me. As I slowly turned, it was then I saw the eye of the clown peering at me through the gap in the seats right behind me. My heart raced as I stood up. This freak was getting closer and closer. I shouted for them to fuck off. As I stood next to the doors waiting for my stop, the clown stood as I'd said this. They froze, staring at me, the smile fading from their face. The train slowly came to a stop. But in that moment, as we both stood there staring at each other, I genuinely felt for my safety. I didn't want to take my eyes off of them. The doors finally opening, I backed onto the platform and headed for the exit. The clown standing like a statue as it watched me. I turned, picking up my pace as I finally heard the train begin to leave the station. I walked through the underpass, wanting nothing more than to get home. In that moment, I'll never forget what happened next. The sound of running footsteps echoed from behind me. Turning my head, I was met with the haunting sight of the clown running at me. Their eyes enraged as they sprinted towards me. The blood in my veins turned to ice as the adrenaline, like an injection of energy, sent me into overdrive as I sprinted for my life towards the exit. I ran as fast as I could, not looking back as I ascended the stairs, breaking into the street. Now, being back on the street and away from the station entrance, I finally built up the courage to turn around, and I was surprised to be met with an empty stairway. The clown was nowhere in sight. I looked around, panting heavily as I composed myself, catching my breath. I didn't understand where they had gone. Maybe they turned back, heading towards the platform. All I did know was, whoever that person was unhinged and scared the shit out of me. Just relieved they were gone, I wasted no time getting the hell out of there, and back home as quickly as I could. I've never been scared like that before. Whoever that was, there was clearly something wrong with them. A sick prank or whatever they wanted to call it. It terrified me. It was literally like being chased by the clown from It. That's what it reminded me of. Now, I never get the last train home. I finish at a reasonable time, and if I have work left over, it can wait. You never know what type of people are out there. So, to that freak dressed as a clown, let's not meet again. For some background context, I'm a 28-year-old male from Basingstoke in the UK. I often exercise outdoors, going for runs, cycles and hikes, occasionally challenging myself and taking part in triathlons. Not only that, but running is a hobby of mine and a way for me to switch off and helps me feel better. Back in 2017, this terrifying encounter happened to me whilst out on a run. I had been struggling to sleep, so I was trying different things to help me. I hadn't been having much luck, so I thought jogging strangely relaxed me. I would go for a jog on the evenings to help tire me out. This seemed to work for the most part, but one evening I was restless and knew there was no point in me going to bed as I would just be lying there with my brain still ticking. I'm sure a lot of you understand that. So, looking at the time, it was 11 PM, it was night, but the middle of summer, so still mild weather, and with that I decided I would go for a nighttime jog. I told my partner as I was getting ready, and she was getting into bed, so she wasn't thrilled with me going out so late to jog. but I had done it many times before and I didn't see the big issue. So as I got ready and said goodbye, I left the house for my midnight jog. There was a park close to where we lived that backed onto the woods. I'd jogged through the park so many times before, so knowing what route I was going to take, I began my journey. As I jogged the streets, unsurprisingly the roads were empty, most people in bed asleep. The occasional car driving past, probably thinking, what weirdos jog at this time at night, but I didn't care. I reached the park and made my way inside, following the path as I jogged through. Halfway through the park, I came up to the entrance to the woods. With the park being empty and it being night, I thought to myself, why not jog through the woods? Something different. And with that, I left the path and ventured into the woods. Obviously, there were dirt paths to follow into the woods, as people had made trails there over time. As I continued my jog, I went deeper into the woods, following the dirt trail. It wasn't long before I'd made my way further inside when I heard the sound of rustling coming from the right of me in the distance. I slowed my pace as I looked to the right. I couldn't see anything, but instantly got paranoid. Hearing a sound in the middle of the woods at night will do that to you. So, with me then trying to remain quiet, I thought it was obviously some woodland animal, a badger or a fox or something like that. With silence falling again, I picked up my pace and continued with my jog. And not 2 minutes later, I heard the rustling coming up from ahead of me again. I again slowed my pace, trying to remain quiet as I continued looking out for what was causing the noise. Putting it down to an animal, I tried not to disturb whatever it was. As I continued to jog through the woods, I approached a clearing, thinking I'd get back on track and out through the other side back to the main park and make my way home. I slowed to take a breather. As I made my way forward, looking around, my eyes instantly fell upon a figure, sitting in the dark, on what looked to be a worn bench in the clearing. As I slowly continued walking through, I couldn't help but stare, thinking who sits alone in the middle of the woods at night? But as I slowly got closer, passing the figure, I soon had an uncomfortable wave of nerves wash over me. With being closer and the slight moonlight breaking through, this wasn't just a person sitting on the bench. This was someone dressed as a clown, sitting there staring right back at me. Their emotionless stare looked right at me, as they didn't even blink. I broke eye contact and continued walking past. Freaked out, thinking what the fuck? I couldn't help but look back and take one more look. But as I turned, I saw the clown was no longer sitting, but standing, watching my every move as its emotionless face turned into a smile, as they just stood there staring at me. Now, I had never seen anything like this out on a jog before, and my decision to take a late night jog and come through the woods didn't seem like the brightest idea anymore. Feeling like their eyes were burning into the back of me, I was about to set off into a jog again, getting the hell out of there, when the sound of running footsteps sent a chill up my spine. I turned to see the clown running right towards me. It scared the shit out of me, and wasting no time I broke out into a run as my adrenaline-fueled legs pelted through the woods. I ran as fast as I could, all the while hearing the tailing footsteps behind me. I didn't stop until I could see the pathway to the park in front of me. Seeing this gave me an extra surge of energy as I broke out onto the path, back into the streetlight. I continued to run from where I exited the woods, until I could no longer hear footsteps behind me. Turning and looking back, I could see the outline of the clown staring and waving at me as they disappeared back into the woods. I could feel my heart racing. Honestly, I'd never been so terrified. I continued my jog back to some sort of civilization, as I jogged out of the park, back to the streets just wanting to get home. I told my partner that night when I arrived back, and with her thinking I was stupid to go jogging through the woods, she thought it was strange and terrifying for someone to be dressed as a clown in the middle of the woods at night. Telling my friends about my encounter, they didn't believe me, but I can honestly say as much as I wish it wasn't real. It was. I don't know what their intentions were, or what would have happened to me if they had caught up to me. Most likely they got what they wanted, scaring the crap out of someone. But you just don't know. There may have been some more sinister intent. Since then, I've never been jogging back through them woods, and now stick to visible areas and jog at a reasonable time. there are some real freaks out there, no matter where you are. So, stay safe out there. I will never forget the terror that I felt the first time I was able to go trick-or-treating alone when I was younger. A friend and I, who lived in the neighborhood, had been wanting this moment forever. To be able to dress up on Halloween, our favorite time of the year, and be able to go trick-or-treating alone without our parents. And in 2006, it was the first year we were allowed to do so. I was so excited getting ready in my pirate costume. The thought of all the candy we were going to get and how much fun we were going to have filled me with energy, and I hadn't even had a piece of candy at that point. I remember our parents giving us the talk, only stay on our street and don't stray too far. We, of course, said yes, but weren't really paying too much attention as we were too excited at the time. And with our goodbye at the door, we headed down the path and into the early evening. As we went house to house, we were greeted by willing participants that complimented our costumes and seemed to enjoy the night as much as we did. It didn't take us long to complete the street, and as mentioned, not really paying too much attention to what we were told earlier, we decided to stray from our street and onto the next. We still had time before we had to get back and still had room for more candy. As the street began to quieten, we seemed to be heading in the opposite direction of all the other dressed up. We made our way up one drive and we were again met with a nice couple who gave us a load of chocolate. It was then, as we made our way back down the drive onto the street, heading to the next house, we heard the sound of a car engine slowly pulling up behind us. As we turned, we saw an old grey Ford trailing the curb next to us. As the window slowly came down, a bearded man looked out the window smiling at us as he said, "Wow, what great costumes you two have. Want to see mine?" We didn't reply as we just kept walking. The car continued to stroll next to us. As we looked back, the man was now in a worn clown mask. "You like my mask?" he asked us. We nodded in approval, just being polite. The man then held up a horn in his hand, squeezing it. "Anyway, my daughter and her friend have been trick-or-treating tonight. They came back with far too much candy for just the two of them. So, I'm just offering it out to people. Do you want some?" As he asked us this question, I thought it was an odd thing to do, and I could see no sign of his daughter, or anyone else for that matter. Feeling an uncomfortable feeling grow on me. My friend, however, spoke for the both of us, when he gladly accepted and said that we would love some candy. "Great. Well, the bag's on the back seat. Just open it up and take what you like." As my friend began to move towards the back door, I pulled his arm to stop him momentarily. "Where's your daughter and her friend?" The clown mask stared back down at me as they chuckled. "They're at home now." Again, I got an uncomfortable feeling in my stomach as I tried to stop my friend from moving closer to the car, but he had already reached the back door. As his hand hovered over the handle, he stopped, slowly backing up as he said, "Actually, we're okay. We have enough candy." As he turned walking back to me, I could see the change of expression on his face from excitement to fear. "What? You can never have enough candy," the man said with a more impatient tone in his voice now. "But you just said your daughter and her friend got too much candy." As I said this, silence fell, as all we could see was the glaring stare of the man's eyes through the clown mask as he stared angrily at us. "I'm offering you free candy. Now open the fucking door and take some. What's wrong with you?" he said impatiently. Our hearts began to race as we both again said no thanks and hurriedly walked up on the road, the car slowly following behind. I asked my friend why he stopped at the door, and what he said next scared the crap out of me. He said when he went to open the door, he saw the figure of another person in a clown mask lying down by the back seat staring at him. I felt sick. I knew what this was. As I looked back at the car trailing us, I told my friend to run to the next house and we would knock for help. As we went up the steps and knocked the door, a woman answered and we told her exactly what happened and pointed over to the car. As she looked up, the car picked up its speed and drove off. That was the end of our trick-or-treating that night. After that, we decided to head back, neither of us feeling safe or in the mood to continue. That other person was clearly hiding, waiting to grab one of us into the car. We didn't want to tell our parents of the encounter, as we knew they would never let us trick-or-treat alone again. So, we just went back and didn't mention it, saying we had a good time and continued with our sleepover that we were having that night. Later that night, we were staying up late, feeling a lot calmer and over the whole ordeal from earlier that evening. As we sat in front of the TV watching a cheesy horror film, I paused the TV, as I thought I could hear something. As we listened in silence, I could hear movement outside the front window. My friend pointed as he said he was sure he saw a shadow move past. As we sat there, I stood up, approaching the window. The blind was shut. As I went to peek through it was then I froze, as the sound of someone trying to wedge open the window sent a shiver down my spine. It stopped as it was clearly locked. It was then we both saw the shadow of a person stand up and move around the side of the house. Our hearts pounding, not knowing who this was outside my house so late at night. I had to see. As I approached the blind to peek through, thinking the person was gone, it was as I looked through, I fell back screaming, as my eyes come face to face with the same clown mask from the car, earlier that night standing in the distance. I heard my parents shout from their bedroom upstairs as we both ran towards the stairs. We told my dad about the man outside the window, and in a rage he ran to the door just in time to open it and see the grey Ford speed off out of sight. The police were called, and we had to give statements and descriptions of who we saw in the car. Those predators must have followed us back to my house that night and waited until they thought everyone was asleep to gain access. It sickens me to this day that we came so close to a child abduction, and that there are sick freaks like this out there. It doesn't matter what time of year it is. I had nightmares about that clown face for months after that traumatizing encounter. If you take anything from this, be safe and cautious out there, especially if you're parents. Clowns who trust them, eh? Thanks for joining us on this one, guys, and we hope you enjoyed this topic. We're looking at some interesting ideas for new videos to get out soon, but if there's any topics you want to suggest, let us know in the comments. And if you guys can drop a like and share the video, it really helps us send the video out. If you're new here to the Horror Motives community, then don't forget to subscribe and join our dark corner of the world, where fear lies within. See you all in the next one.